The great amphitheater of the Galactic Concord stretched across 17 kilometers of crystalline architecture, suspended in the perpetual twilight between three dying stars. For 11,000 years, this place had served as the ultimate arbiter of civilization, where species rose to prominence or were condemned to obscurity, where wars ended and began, where the fate of entire worlds hung upon the carefully measured words of ancient beings who had witnessed the birth and death of countless suns.
Today, they gathered to discuss humanity.
High Arbiter Voloxian Thrace unfurled his consciousness across the assembly, his form a shifting kaleidoscope of bioluminescent tendrils that pulsed with the weight of his authority.
Around him, representatives of the 9 founding species took their positions: the crystalline architects who had first mapped the galaxy's trade routes, the gaseous whispered who communed with the quantum foam of reality itself, the immortal chroniclers who remembered everything and forgot nothing, and 6 others whose names translated poorly into any human tongue.
Beyond them, arranged in descending tiers of significance, sat delegates from 847 recognized civilizations. Some had achieved faster-than-light travel before humanity's ancestors had learned to walk upright. Others had mastered the manipulation of gravity, the harvesting of dying stars, the preservation of consciousness beyond physical death. All of them had opinions about Earth.
"We are gathered," Voloxian intoned, his voice resonating across frequencies that most species couldn't perceive, "to render judgment on the human question. They have achieved threshold contact. Their vessels have breached the outer boundary of Concord space. By ancient covenant, we must now decide: integration, isolation, or elimination."
The word hung in the processed atmosphere like a blade waiting to fall. Ambassador Korath of the militant hegemony was the first to speak, his armored form rising from the warbench where his kind had sat for 3,000 years. Elimination. There is no debate to be had. I have studied these creatures since their first radio emissions poisoned the local stellar medium with their chaos. They are violent. Their history is an unbroken chain of war, genocide, and self-destruction. They developed atomic weapons before they achieved basic planetary unity, a statistical impossibility that suggests fundamental cognitive deficiency. They will bring nothing but instability to the Concord.
"The hegemony's position is noted," Voloxian said, "though we remind the ambassador that your own species achieved unity only after the complete extinction of your 7 competing subspecies, stones and glass habitations, as the humans might say."
A ripple of amusement passed through certain sections of the assembly. Korath's mandibles clacked in barely contained fury, but he retook his seat. The whispered offer perspective came a voice that seemed to emerge from everywhere and nowhere, a condensation of thought into sound that left most delegates feeling slightly displaced from their own bodies. "We have tasted the quantum signature of human consciousness. It is unusual." They exist in a state of perpetual contradiction, simultaneously the most hopeful and most despairing, the most creative and most destructive, the most loving and most hateful species we have encountered in 6 million years of observation. They do not resolve these contradictions, they embrace them. This makes them unpredictable.
"Unpredictability is danger," Korath growled.
"Unpredictability is also potential," countered the whispered. "We do not advocate for any position. We merely observe that humanity defies our models. Every projection we have made about their development has failed. They should have destroyed themselves during their atomic age. They did not. They should have collapsed into permanent division after their information revolution. They did not.
They should have taken centuries to develop fusion propulsion after their initial spacefaring attempts. They did so in decades. High Architect Luminax rose from the geometric throne that served as both seat and calculation engine. Her crystalline form refracted the ambient light into patterns that conveyed meaning to those who knew how to read them. The architects have analyzed human infrastructure development. Their approach is inefficient, chaotic. They build without proper planning, expand without adequate resource assessment, and frequently construct systems that work against each other.
By every metric we use to evaluate civilizational potential, they should have plateaued millennia ago.
And yet, Veloxian prompted, and yet they have not. Their inefficiency generates unexpected redundancies. Their chaos produces innovations that our models suggest should require tens of thousands of years more development. They do not optimize, they improvise. It is deeply unsettling.
Unsettling is not a threat category, said Ambassador Yinte of the collaborative sphere, her gelatinous form spreading across her diplomatic cushion in a display of confident relaxation. The sphere has interacted with humanity through 3 separate covert contact protocols over the past 2 centuries. They are crude, yes, aggressive, certainly, but they display a remarkable capacity for cooperation when properly motivated.
We believe integration is possible, with appropriate guidance and restriction, of course.
Restriction? This from the chronicler representative, whose voice carried the dry weight of eons. You speak of restricting a species that, in less than 300 years, went from chemical rockets to fusion drives. A species that has already developed theoretical frameworks for technologies we deliberately keep from developing civilizations. A species that... The chronicler paused, and when they spoke again, there was something almost like awe in their ancient voice.
Has independently derived the mathematical foundations of dimensional folding, despite having no access to the prerequisite gravitational manipulation technology. They did this through pure mathematics, through imagination.
The assembly stirred. This was new information.
When? Veloxian demanded. When was this discovered?
17 of their years ago. A human researcher named Chen published a paper that most of her species' scientific establishment dismissed as pure fantasy. Our monitors flagged it immediately. Had she access to the proper engineering frameworks, she could have constructed a functioning fold-space aperture within a decade. And you are only now sharing this with the Concord. The chroniclers share information when it becomes relevant. It has become relevant because, as of 6 of their days ago, another human researcher named David Okonkwo synthesized Chen's work with advances in their material science. He has constructed a working prototype.
The amphitheater erupted into chaos.
Veloxian's tendrils flared with bioluminescent fury, demanding silence. It took several minutes for order to be restored. When it was, the High Arbiter's voice carried a cold edge that hadn't been present before.
The humans have developed fold space capability, independent of outside assistance, in a fraction of the time required by any species in recorded history. He turned his attention to the chronicler. What are the implications of this development?
The implications are that this debate may be occurring too late. With fold space capability, humanity is no longer confined to the outer boundary of Concord space. They can, theoretically, reach any point in the galaxy within hours, including this very station.
They would not dare, Korath snarled. They have no knowledge of our existence, no understanding of what they face. Even with fold space travel, they are a single species with a handful of vessels. The hegemony alone fields over 8 million warships.
And how many of those warships, the Whispered interjected, were designed to counter fold space incursion? By our calculations, fewer than 3% of the hegemony's fleet can effectively engage fold-capable vessels. The technology has been considered stable and stably distributed for so long that defensive protocols have atrophied across most Concord civilizations.
This is fear-mongering, Korath said, though his certainty seemed shaken. One prototype does not constitute a threat. The humans have not yet deployed this technology. There is still time to act decisively.
You mean there is still time to kill them, Ambassador Yintha said flatly. To eliminate an entire species because they might, potentially, at some point in the future, pose a theoretical threat. This is not the way of the Concord.
The Concord's way has not previously been tested against a species that develops extinction-level capabilities in the time it takes most civilizations to achieve basic political reform. The humans are not like us. They do not follow the patterns. They do not respect the timelines. They are, Korath struggled for the right word, impatient. And impatience in a species this capable is existentially dangerous.
Veloxian raised a tendril, calling for attention. We have heard arguments for elimination and for integration. Are there those who would advocate for isolation, for containing humanity within their current territory until a more thorough assessment can be made?
A new voice entered the debate, one that surprised many of the assembled delegates. The Architects of the Void, a splinter faction of the main architect civilization that had chosen to study the spaces between stars rather than the stars themselves, rarely spoke in Concord proceedings. Their representative, a crystalline form darker than the void they had named themselves after, rose from a position that most delegates had assumed was unoccupied.
Isolation is impractical, the Void Architect said. We have observed humanity's response to containment throughout their history. When restricted, they do not accept, they do not adapt, they overcome. Every barrier placed before them has eventually been breached, and each breach has made them stronger, more determined, more capable. Isolating humanity would not protect the Concord. It would simply give them motivation and time.
Then what would you have us do? Veloxian asked.
We would have the Concord recognize an uncomfortable truth. We are not deciding humanity's fate. We are deciding our own. The humans will continue to develop regardless of our deliberations. They will continue to push beyond every boundary we establish. The only question is whether we position ourselves as their partners or their obstacles. History suggests they are not kind to obstacles.
You speak as though they were our equals, Korath said with evident disgust.
They are infants. They have existed for less than a heartbeat of cosmic time. They know nothing of the galaxy's true complexities, the ancient compacts, the forces that have been held in balance for eons. Their arrogance does not make them powerful. It makes them dangerous fools.
Perhaps, the Void Architect acknowledged. But consider this. Every species in this assembly achieved faster-than-light travel through one of three pathways. They either developed it independently over the course of many thousands of years, received it as a gift from an elder civilization, or stole it through conquest or espionage. The humans have done something different. They have derived it from first principles in a single generation. This is not arrogance.
This is a fundamental shift in how species can develop. And if they can do this with fold space technology, what else might they derive? What other impossible leaps might they make while we debate whether they deserve to exist?
The assembly fell silent. Even Korath seemed to have no immediate response.
Veloxian let the silence stretch, allowing the weight of the Void Architect's words to settle into the consciousness of every delegate present. Then he spoke.
We will take a preliminary vote. Not binding, but indicative. All those who favor immediate elimination of the human species.
Perhaps a third of the delegates signaled assent, primarily the more militant civilizations, those who had themselves risen to power through force and recognized, perhaps better than others, the threat that human development posed to established hierarchies.
All those who favor integration with appropriate safeguards?
Another third responded. The collaborative sphere and its allies, species that had learned to see strength in diversity and were eager to add human creativity to the galactic whole.
All those who favor isolation, pending further assessment. A smaller number, those who hoped that delay might provide clarity, that more time would reveal whether humanity was truly as dangerous as some feared or as promising as others hoped.
And all those who are undecided?
The remainder of the assembly signaled their uncertainty. It was, Veloxian noted, the largest faction.
We are divided, he said. This is not unexpected, given the complexity of the question before us. I propose that we adjourn for a period of contemplation and consultation. The full Concord will reconvene in—
He never finished the sentence.
The first indication that something had changed was a subtle shift in the amphitheater's ambient illumination. The crystalline architecture was designed to maintain perfect environmental stability, so any change was immediately noticeable. This change was not subtle for long.
Space folded. There was no other way to describe it. The fabric of reality creased, buckled, and then opened like a wound in the universe. Through that wound came a ship.
It was not large by Concord standards, perhaps a kilometer in length, barely a fraction of the hegemony's dreadnoughts. Its design was crude, utilitarian, lacking the elegant geometries of architect vessels or the flowing organic forms of whispered craft. It was a thing of hard angles and raw functionality, covered in sensor arrays and communication dishes and what were unmistakably weapon emplacements.
It should not have been possible. The amphitheater was protected by 17 layers of defensive systems, each developed by a different founding species, each designed to prevent exactly this kind of intrusion. No fold space-capable vessel had ever breached the station's perimeter.
Until now. Korath was on his feet immediately, mandibles clicking in what was either alarm or anticipation. Mobilize the defensive grid, destroy that vessel before—
No. The word came from Veloxian, and it carried the full weight of his authority. The High Arbiter's tendrils had extended to their maximum reach, bioluminescent patterns shifting through colors that most species had never seen him display before.
High Arbiter? Korath's voice was incredulous. You cannot be suggesting we allow this incursion to—
I am suggesting, Veloxian said slowly, that if we could destroy that vessel, we already would have. Look at your tactical displays, Ambassador. Look carefully.
Korath looked, the blood drained from his face, or whatever served as blood in his armored body.
The human vessel had not simply folded into the amphitheater's space, it had folded into a position that perfectly neutralized every defensive system in the station. It hung precisely in the intersection of 17 null zones, places where the various defensive layers canceled each other out. By any calculation, finding such a position should have been impossible.
It would have required simultaneous analysis of every defensive protocol, systems that were supposedly secret, known only to the species that had created them.
They knew, the Whispered said, their voice carrying a note of something that might have been admiration. They knew everything. The layout of our defenses, the positions of our weaknesses, the timing of our deliberations. They have been watching us watch them.
The vessel's communication systems activated. The transmission was broadcast on every frequency, in every language known to the Concord, simultaneously.
Greetings to the assembled representatives of the Galactic Concord. I am Captain Elena Vasquez of the Earth vessel Prometheus. I apologize for the unconventional entrance, but I'm afraid we couldn't wait for a formal invitation.
The voice was calm, measured, with an undertone of something that might have been amusement. On the amphitheater's main display, an image appeared, a human female, dark-skinned and silver-haired, wearing a uniform that bore the insignia of Earth's United Aerospace Command.
We know what you've been discussing. We've known for some time. We've been monitoring your long-range communications since we first became aware of your existence, which was somewhat earlier than your covert contact protocols seem to have assumed. Ambassador Yintha's gelatinous form contracted in shock. The collaborative sphere's carefully hidden surveillance operation had been detected, analyzed, used as a source of intelligence?
To be specific, Captain Vasquez continued, we've been aware of the Galactic Concord for approximately 87 years, since a malfunction in one of your observation drones caused it to broadcast its data stream on an unencrypted frequency for approximately 37 seconds. It was enough.
Impossible,
Korath breathed. 87 years ago, humans had barely achieved orbital capability. They couldn't possibly have
Detected an alien signal, decoded its content, realized that we were being watched by entities who might someday decide our fate. Captain Vasquez's smile was thin and hard. You've made an error, Ambassador. Several of you have, actually. You've assumed that because we're young, we're ignorant, that because we're chaotic, we're incompetent, that because we fight among ourselves, we're incapable of unifying against an external threat. We've been listening to your debate. Some of you want to eliminate us, to wipe out our species before we become a threat. Others want to integrate us, to bring us into your concord as junior members, subject to appropriate restrictions. Still others want to isolate us, to contain us within some arbitrary boundary until you've decided what to do with us.
Here's what none of you seem to have considered. We might have opinions about our own fate.
The amphitheater was silent. Every delegate, every representative, every observer was transfixed by the image of this single human speaking to them from a ship that shouldn't exist, in a place it couldn't possibly be.
87 years ago, we learned that we weren't alone in the universe. We learned that we were being watched, evaluated, judged by species that had already decided we were probably too dangerous to be allowed to exist. Do you know what we did with that knowledge? Captain Vasquez leaned forward, and her eyes, human eyes, fragile and small and burning with something that none of the assembled species could quite name, seemed to look at each delegate individually.
We didn't panic, we didn't despair. We didn't collapse into paranoia or turn on each other more than we already were. We got to work.
The fold space technology that brought us here? The project started 63 years ago. Completely black budget. Every major nation on Earth contributing resources, sharing information, putting aside differences that had defined their politics for centuries. Because we understood something that you apparently don't. When someone is debating whether to kill you, you don't wait for their decision. You make sure that when they come for you, you're ready.
High Arbiter Veloxian's tendrils rippled with complex emotions. You developed fold space capability, not for exploration, not for expansion, but as a weapon, as a response to a threat you believed we posed.
Believed? Captain Vasquez raised an eyebrow. High Arbiter, I've been listening to your colleagues call for our extinction for the past 6 hours. Ambassador Korath has advocated for decisive action approximately 17 times. The militant hegemony's voting delegation has already prepared a resolution calling for the immediate sanitization of Earth and all human colonies. Forgive me if I don't take comfort in the passive voice.
Korath's mandibles clacked furiously. You dare!
I dare, Vasquez interrupted, because I am the duly appointed representative of 8 billion human beings who have spent the last 87 years knowing that somewhere, out in the dark, someone was deciding whether they deserve to exist. I dare because my species has already survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and our own worst impulses. I dare because we have walked on our moon, split the atom, decoded the language of life itself, and touched the face of the infinite.
I dare because we are human, and we do not ask permission to survive.
She paused, letting her words sink in.
But I didn't come here just to deliver threats. Threats are easy. Any species can threaten. What makes a civilization is what it does after the threatening is done.
I came here to offer you a choice, the same choice you've been trying to deny us.
The Prometheus is not alone. 18 hours ago, Earth deployed its entire fold-capable fleet, 107 vessels, distributed across 107 critical points in Concord space, trade nexuses, communication hubs, defensive installations. Each ship carries a payload sufficient to collapse the local space-time continuum into a temporary singularity.
The assembly erupted. Delegates screamed, pleaded, threatened. Korath was on his feet, bellowing orders that no one was listening to.
Even the usually composed architects seemed to fracture slightly, their crystalline forms emitting harmonic frequencies that spoke of deep structural stress.
Veloxian's voice cut through the chaos like a blade of cold light. Silence! Silence!
Order was restored, though the terror remained. Captain Vasquez waited patiently on the display, as if she had all the time in the universe.
"You're holding the galaxy hostage," Veloxian said. It wasn't an accusation, more an observation, as if he was trying to understand what he was witnessing.
No, Vasquez replied. I'm demonstrating capability. If I were holding you hostage, I would have already destroyed something to prove I was serious. Instead, I'm telling you what I could do and asking you to recognize what that means.
And what does it mean?
It means that the dynamic of this conversation has changed. You were debating our fate, now we're debating yours. Or, she held up a hand, forestalling the outraged responses that were clearly forming. We can recognize that both of those approaches are fundamentally flawed and try something different.
The void architect spoke, their dark crystalline form seeming to absorb the ambient light. You're offering a third option. Neither elimination, nor integration, nor isolation. Something else.
Exactly, Vasquez nodded, seeming genuinely pleased that someone understood. We're offering equality.
"Equality," Korath's voice dripped with contempt. "You have 107 vessels. The hegemony alone has 8 million. In what possible sense are you our equals?"
In the sense that those 107 vessels can end your civilization, Vasquez said flatly. In the sense that, yes, you could probably destroy us in the long run, but not before we did catastrophic damage to everything you've built. In the sense that for the first time in your history, you're facing a species that developed the capacity for mutually assured destruction before you had a chance to manage them.
"That's not equality," Korath growled. "That's terrorism."
No, Ambassador. Terrorism is what you do when you have no power and want to create the illusion of having it. This is what you do when you have exactly enough power to make your enemies think twice. There's a difference. Humanity has had a lot of practice understanding that difference.
Ambassador Yinthei's form rippled with what might have been distress or might have been calculation. You said you wanted to try something different. What exactly are you proposing?
I'm proposing that we stop treating this as a one-sided evaluation and start treating it as a negotiation. We want recognition as a sovereign species with equal standing in any galactic community. We want access to the knowledge and technology that you've accumulated over your millennia of existence, not as gifts or charity, but as part of fair exchange. We want a seat at tables like this one, where decisions that affect us are being made.
And we want guarantees, real, enforceable guarantees, that no species, no coalition, no concord will ever again presume to debate our right to exist.
In exchange, we're prepared to offer something that you've never encountered before. Genuine partnership with a species that thinks differently than anyone you've ever known. We innovate faster than your models predict because we don't limit ourselves to what models predict. We overcome obstacles that should be insurmountable because we refuse to accept the definition of insurmountable.
We survive crises that should destroy us. Because, she paused, and for the first time her voice carried something other than cold determination. Because that's what we do. It's who we are.
And if we refuse? Veloxian asked.
Then we all lose, Vasquez said simply. Your defensive installations collapse into singularities. Trade routes become impassable. Communication networks fail. The carefully balanced political structure of your concord falls apart, as species that have been held in check by the threat of collective action realize that the collective is no longer able to act. And somewhere in the chaos, humanity either survives or doesn't.
But either way, everything you've built over 11,000 years comes undone in a matter of days.
That's mutual destruction.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. And the fact that we're willing to embrace that possibility, to choose destruction over subjugation, should tell you something about what kind of species you're dealing with. The amphitheater fell silent once again. The weight of Captain Vasquez's words seemed to press down on every delegate, forcing them to confront a reality that their comfortable certainties had never prepared them for.
Finally, it was the chronicler who spoke. You said something earlier. You said that humanity learned of our existence 87 years ago, and that you got to work. I would hear more of this. What did you do in those 87 years? How did you prepare for this moment?
Vasquez's expression softened slightly. You want to understand us. That's more than most of your colleagues have offered.
Understanding is what the chroniclers do. It is our purpose and our burden. And I confess that for the first time in a very long time, I am faced with something I do not understand. A species that developed fold space technology in decades, that predicted the exact configuration of our defensive systems, that coordinated a global secret for nearly a century. These things should not be possible. I wish to know how they became possible.
Then I'll tell you. Vasquez settled back in her command chair, and her voice took on a storytelling quality that seemed to resonate through the assembly.
87 years ago, a radio telescope in Chile detected an anomalous signal. The scientist who discovered it was named Anna Kowalski. She was young, brilliant, and entirely alone in her conviction that the signal was artificial. Her colleagues dismissed her findings. Her superiors threatened to end her career. The scientific establishment of her era was not prepared to accept the implications of what she had found.
So she did what humans do when the system fails them. She went around it. She leaked her data to a network of amateur astronomers and signal analysts who had been searching for exactly this kind of discovery. Within weeks, they had confirmed her findings. Within months, the information had reached governments that had the resources to investigate further.
And here is where things get interesting. The governments of Earth were, at that time, in a state of barely concealed hostility toward one another. The Cold War had ended only a few decades earlier, but its legacy remained in the form of nuclear arsenals, intelligence agencies, and a pervasive atmosphere of mutual suspicion. By every logical calculation, the discovery of alien observers should have made this worse.
Each nation should have tried to make contact independently, to gain advantage over its rivals, to weaponize the knowledge.
Instead, something else happened. The leaders who learned of the discovery, Americans, Russians, Chinese, Europeans, and others, made a collective decision. They recognized that whatever was out there, whatever was watching them, represented a threat that transcended their petty divisions. For the first time in human history, the great powers of Earth agreed on something without the need for war or economic coercion. They agreed to keep the secret and to prepare. Vasquez's voice carried a note of wonder, as if she still found this part of the story hard to believe.
The project was called Prometheus. It started small, just a handful of scientists and military planners working in facilities hidden from their own governments, funded through black budgets that were never officially acknowledged. Their mandate was simple: assume that the entities watching Earth were hostile and develop the means to resist them.
In the early years, progress was slow. The technology gap seemed insurmountable. How could a species that had only recently achieved nuclear fusion hope to compete with civilizations that had mastered faster-than-light travel? The early Prometheus scientists were brilliant, but they were working from first principles, with no framework for understanding what they were up against.
Then, about 50 years ago, something changed. A new generation of scientists came into the project, people who had grown up knowing about the alien presence, who had been trained from childhood to think in ways that their predecessors had not. One of them was Maya Chen.
Several delegates stirred at the name. The chroniclers had mentioned her earlier, the researcher who had derived the mathematics of fold space from pure theory. Maya wasn't just a physicist. She was an artist, a philosopher, a practitioner of meditation techniques that most of her colleagues dismissed as mysticism.
She approached scientific problems the way a poet approaches language, not through linear analysis, but through intuition and metaphor and sudden leaps of connection that couldn't be explained by logic alone. And she saw something that no one else had seen. She saw that the mathematics of space-time was not a closed system. There were gaps, places where the equations broke down, where the rules seemed to bend. Most physicists dismissed these as artifacts, errors in the theory that would eventually be resolved. Maya saw them as doorways. Her paper, the one that your chroniclers flagged, was not a technical blueprint. It was a philosophical argument. It claimed that space-time was not a fixed thing, but a kind of negotiation between consciousness and reality. That the gaps in the equations were places where that negotiation was still unresolved, and that a sufficiently focused mind, equipped with the right tools, could push through those gaps and emerge somewhere else entirely. The scientific establishment of her time dismissed her work as fantasy, but the Prometheus Project didn't. They understood that she was offering them something that their more conventional researchers could never have found, a path that didn't require millions of years of incremental development, a path that went around the normal rules. It took another 20 years to translate her insights into working technology. 20 years of failures, dead ends, and experiments that killed people. We lost 3 research stations and 217 scientists before we figured out how to stabilize the fold space aperture. But we did figure it out, and when we did, we had something that no one else in the galaxy had ever achieved. Faster than light travel, developed from scratch in less than a century.
The whispered's voice echoed through the assembly. We felt it. 6 of their years ago. A disturbance in the quantum substrate, like nothing we had encountered before. We assumed it was a natural phenomenon, some exotic decay process in a nearby stellar body. We were wrong.
Yes, Vasquez confirmed. You were wrong. Our first successful fold test was conducted in deep space, far from any observation points that we knew about, but we weren't certain that we had avoided detection, so we proceeded with caution. We built more ships, we trained crews, we mapped your space using passive observation and the occasional covert fold insertion, and we prepared for this moment, the moment when you would finally decide to do something about us, and we would have to be ready. You prepared for war, Korath said. His voice was strange, not hostile anymore, but something else, something that might have been respect. We prepared for whatever was necessary, Vasquez corrected. War was one possibility, but we also prepared for negotiation, for cooperation, for integration on terms that we could accept. The difference is that we prepared for these things as equals, not as supplicants waiting to learn our fate. We learned a long time ago that the only rights you have are the ones you're able to defend. High Arbiter Veloxian's tendrils had stilled during Vasquez's account. Now they began to move again, slowly, contemplatively. You have presented us with a remarkable situation, Captain. In 11,000 years of Concord history, no species has ever addressed this assembly from a position of genuine parity. You have achieved this not through millennia of development, but through a few generations of focused effort. It is unprecedented. Unprecedented doesn't mean impossible, Vasquez said. It just means no one has done it before. Indeed, Veloxian's voice was thoughtful. I find myself wondering what else you might do, given time. What other impossible achievements might your species produce if you were given the resources and knowledge of the Concord to work with? That's exactly the question I was hoping you'd ask, Vasquez replied, and for the first time her smile seemed genuine rather than calculated. Korath stirred in his seat. High Arbiter, you cannot be considering. I am considering everything, Ambassador. That is my function. And I am finding that my considerations are leading me to unexpected places. She is threatening us.
Her ships are positioned to destroy critical infrastructure across the entire galaxy. This is not diplomacy, it is coercion.
Is it? The Void Architect's dark form seemed to pulse with internal light. Or is it simply a more honest form of negotiation than we are accustomed to? Every species in this assembly achieved its position through some combination of force, leverage, and strategic positioning. We simply prefer to forget this when dealing with younger civilizations. We prefer to believe that our dominance is natural, earned, deserved.
Captain Vasquez has reminded us that dominance is always contingent, always dependent on the ability to defend what you claim.
The Void Architect speaks truth, the Whispered added. We have grown comfortable in our supremacy. We have forgotten what it means to face an equal, a genuine equal, capable of challenging our assumptions and our power. Perhaps this is what we needed. Perhaps the humans are not a threat to be eliminated, but a mirror to show us what we have become.
Pretty words, Korath growled. But words will not protect us when their ships open fire.
No, Vasquez agreed. Words won't. That's why I'm not relying on words. I'm relying on mutual self-interest. You want stability. We want security. You want your trade routes and communication networks to function. We want access to the knowledge and technology you've hoarded for millennia. You want to avoid a catastrophic conflict that could unravel your entire galactic civilization. We want to not be exterminated by species that have decided we're too dangerous to exist.
These aren't contradictory goals. They're complementary. The only question is whether you're capable of seeing us as partners rather than problems. Ambassador Yinthe's form had been reshaping itself throughout the exchange, forming structures that seemed to represent deep cognitive processing. Now she spoke, her voice carrying the weight of the collaborative sphere's collective decision-making.
The sphere has long advocated for the integration of new species into the Concord. We have always believed that diversity strengthens the whole, that each new perspective adds to our collective wisdom. But we have also always approached integration as a process that we control, a gift that we bestow upon those we deem worthy.
Captain Vasquez has shown us that this approach is inadequate. Humanity does not seek our blessing. They do not ask to be integrated. They demand recognition, partnership, equality. This is not the behavior of a supplicant. It is the behavior of a peer.
She paused, her gelatinous form settling into a configuration that signified formal decision.
The collaborative sphere revises its position. We no longer advocate for integration with appropriate safeguards. We advocate for alliance, true alliance, between equals, with all the rights and responsibilities that implies.
A murmur ran through the assembly. The sphere's shift was significant. They were one of the largest coalitions in the Concord, representing hundreds of species and trillions of individuals.
This is madness, Korath insisted, but his voice had lost some of its conviction. You would ally with a species that has been civilized for less than 10,000 years, that still practices warfare among its own kind, that threatens destruction as a negotiating tactic?
Yes, Yintha said, simply, because the alternative is a war that no one wants, against an enemy that has proven capable of surprises we cannot predict. And because, if I am being honest with myself, I find Captain Vasquez's directness refreshing. When did we last meet a species that told us exactly what it wanted and exactly what it was willing to do to get it?
When did we last encounter honesty, rather than the elaborate games of implication and inference that pass for diplomacy in the Concord?
Honesty, backed by threats of annihilation, is not a virtue.
Perhaps not, but it is at least clear, and clarity is something we have lacked for far too long.
The debate continued for hours. Species that had remained silent throughout the earlier discussions found their voices. Ancient alliances shifted. Unexpected coalitions formed. The monolithic certainty of the Concord fractured along lines that had been invisible before. revealing tensions and disagreements that had been papered over by millennia of comfortable dominance.
Throughout it all, Captain Vasquez watched from the display, occasionally answering questions or providing clarifications, but mostly allowing the assembly to work through its own contradictions. She had done what she came to do. She had changed the terms of the debate. The rest was up to them.
Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, High Arbiter Veloxian called for silence.
We have heard extensive arguments on all sides. The positions are clear. There are those who still advocate for elimination, though I note that their numbers have diminished considerably. There are those who advocate for the alliance that the collaborative sphere has proposed. And there are those who remain uncertain, who wish for more time to consider the implications of what we have witnessed today.
I must make a decision. This is my function, my burden, my privilege as High Arbiter of the Galactic Concord.
He paused, his bioluminescent tendrils shifting through colors that had no names in any language.
Humanity has done something that no species in recorded history has achieved. They have gone from primitive star travel to fold space capability in less than a century. They have identified and exploited vulnerabilities in our defensive systems that we did not know existed. They have positioned themselves to force our hand, to make us choose between accepting them as equals or facing mutual destruction.
These are not the actions of a foolish or impulsive species. These are the actions of a species that has looked at the galaxy, understood its power structures, and found a way to claim a place at the table. This is exactly the kind of strategic thinking that we have always valued in our member civilizations.
But more than that, they have shown us something about ourselves that we had forgotten. They have reminded us that the Concord was not always a comfortable hierarchy of established powers. It was forged in conflict, in crisis, in the desperate need for cooperation in the face of existential threats. The founding species did not come together because they naturally agreed. They came together because they recognized that the alternative was mutual annihilation.
Humanity has offered us a choice: accept them as equals or face the consequences of rejection. This is not, as some have suggested, mere coercion. It is an invitation to rediscover something that we have lost, the understanding that civilization is not a static achievement, but an ongoing negotiation. That every species, no matter how powerful, must justify its place through contribution rather than mere longevity.
I have made my decision. The amphitheater held its breath.
Humanity will be recognized as a peer civilization of the Galactic Concord. They will be granted full access to all shared knowledge and technology. They will be given a permanent seat in this assembly, with voting rights equal to any other member species. And the Concord will commit to a defensive alliance, guaranteeing that no member civilization will take unilateral action against Earth or its colonies.
Korath was on his feet. You cannot—
I can, Veloxian said, and his voice carried the full weight of 11,000 years of authority. The High Arbiter's decision is final in matters of first contact and species recognition. This is established covenant. If you wish to challenge it, Ambassador, you may petition for a full assembly review, but I remind you that such reviews take centuries, and in the meantime, my decision stands. Furthermore, he continued, I am invoking the protocol of transformation. This assembly will reconstitute itself around the new reality that humanity represents. The old certainties are gone. The comfortable hierarchies are broken. What we build next must be better, must be worthy of the challenge that humanity has presented.
Captain Vasquez.
High Arbiter, do you accept these terms? Recognition, access, alliance, but also responsibility. If humanity becomes part of the Concord, you will be bound by our laws, our obligations, our duties to each other. You will no longer be able to stand apart, threatening destruction if you don't get your way. You will be one of us.
Vasquez was silent for a long moment, On the display, her expression was unreadable.
There's something I need to say first, something I should have said at the beginning.
Say it.
The 107 ships, the singularity weapons, the threat of mutual destruction. She took a deep breath. It was a bluff.
The assembly erupted once again. Veloxian's tendrils flared with colors of outrage and disbelief. Even the normally composed whispered seemed to ripple with shock.
A bluff? Korath's voice was somewhere between fury and incredulity. You threatened to destroy the galaxy's infrastructure, and it was a bluff?
The ships are real, Vasquez said quickly. 107 vessels, exactly where I said they were. Our fold space capability is real. Our ability to appear anywhere in the galaxy with minimal warning is real. What's not real is the singularity weapons. We never developed them. We don't have the physics for it. Yet.
Then why?
Because we needed you to believe that we could destroy everything, not that we would. We needed you to think of us as equals, as a species capable of ending your civilization if provoked.
And we needed to do that before your debate reached its conclusion, before the advocates for elimination had a chance to act on their recommendations.
She leaned forward, her eyes burning with intensity.
Here's the truth, High Arbiter. Humanity is not as powerful as I led you to believe. We have 107 fold-capable ships, yes, but most of them are barely armed. We have brilliant scientists and engineers, but we're still centuries behind your technology in most areas. We have determination and adaptability, but we don't have the resources to fight a prolonged war against even a minor Concord power, let alone the militant hegemony.
What we have is the ability to surprise you, to show up where you don't expect us, to do things that your models say are impossible, to make you uncertain about what we might do next. And in a galaxy where everyone knows everyone else's capabilities, where strategic calculations have been refined over millennia, uncertainty is the most valuable weapon of all.
I came here today to create uncertainty, to make you question your assumptions, to force you to consider the possibility that eliminating humanity might cost more than you were willing to pay. And it worked. Not because we're as dangerous as I claimed, but because you couldn't be sure that we weren't.
Veloxian's tendrils had stilled again. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, contemplative.
You lied to us.
I bluffed. There's a difference. A lie is meant to deceive permanently. A bluff is meant to change the dynamic of a negotiation. I always intended to tell you the truth, once the truth wouldn't get us killed.
And if we had called your bluff, if Korath had ordered an attack and your ships had been unable to respond as you claimed?
Then we would have died, all of us, the entire human species, and probably a good portion of the crews on your ships as well. Our vessels might not have singularity weapons, but they have enough conventional armament to make any engagement costly. Vasquez's voice was steady. That was the risk we accepted, the risk we've been preparing to accept for 87 years.
We knew that when this moment came, when the Concord decided to do something about us, we would have one chance to change the story, one chance to go from threat to be eliminated to equal to be negotiated with. We didn't know exactly how it would happen, but we knew it would require convincing you that the cost of destroying us was too high.
The singularity weapons were a fiction, but the willingness to die rather than accept subjugation, that was absolutely real. The assembly was silent. Every delegate seemed to be processing what they had heard, reconsidering everything that had come before.
Finally, the chronicler spoke. In all my long existence, I have never witnessed anything quite like this. A species that achieved fold space travel through pure theory, that penetrated our observation networks, that predicted our deliberations with remarkable accuracy, that positioned its vessels to maximize strategic uncertainty, and then, when it had achieved its objectives, revealed that its greatest weapon was a falsehood.
Most species, the chronicler continued,
would have maintained the deception. They would have used the fear of singularity weapons to extract concessions, to establish dominance, to protect themselves from retaliation. You have chosen a different path. You have chosen to tell us the truth, knowing that it makes you vulnerable.
Why?
Vasquez's answer was simple. Because we don't want to rule the galaxy. We don't want to be feared. We just want to exist, to explore, to learn, to grow, to contribute something meaningful to whatever comes next. And you can't build real relationships on lies. You can only build them on trust.
We showed you that we're capable of deception when we need to be. That's important. It means you'll never be able to count on us being predictable, being easy to manipulate or dismiss. But we also showed you that we're capable of honesty, even when it costs us. That's important too.
The question now is, what kind of relationship do you want? One where you're constantly wondering what we might be hiding, what new surprises we might be planning? Or one where we actually try to understand each other, to work together, to build something that neither of us could build alone?
Veloxian's bioluminescent display had cycled through a remarkable range of colors during Vasquez's explanation. Now it settled into a pattern that most delegates had never seen before, a configuration that the oldest records described as profound reassessment.
You have given us much to consider, Captain. The revelation that your primary threat was a bluff changes many calculations. There are those who will argue that this demonstrates human untrustworthiness, that you are a species of deceivers who cannot be relied upon.
I suspect that argument will come primarily from Ambassador Korath, Vasquez said dryly.
Indeed, but there are others who will see this differently, who will recognize that your bluff was a defensive measure designed to protect your species from annihilation, who will appreciate the courage required to reveal the truth once you had achieved your immediate objective, who will understand that your willingness to be vulnerable now, when you could have maintained the deception indefinitely, speaks to something fundamental about human character.
I am one of those others. My decision stands. Humanity will be recognized as a peer civilization. The terms I outlined remain in effect. But I am adding an additional provision, one that has never been included in any recognition treaty before.
The Concord will establish a permanent human advisory position within the High Arbiter's Council, a human voice that will help us understand this new species, anticipate their needs and capabilities, and integrate their perspective into our decision-making. This is not a reward for your deception. It is a recognition that we need to understand you better, and that understanding requires ongoing dialogue.
Furthermore, I am directing the chroniclers to begin a comprehensive study of human history, culture, and development, not for the purpose of evaluation or judgment, but for the purpose of learning. You have achieved things that our models said were impossible. We need to understand how. We need to understand what other impossible things you might be capable of.
And finally, I am invoking the Protocol of Exchange. For the first time in Concord history, we will be sharing our knowledge not as a one-way gift, but as a true exchange. Humanity will receive access to our accumulated wisdom. In return, humanity will share its own knowledge, its own methods, its own ways of thinking. We will learn from each other.
Captain Vasquez's expression had changed during Veloxian's speech. The cold determination that had characterized her throughout the confrontation had softened into something else, something that looked almost like hope.
You're treating us as equals, actually equals, not just pretending for political convenience.
Yes, because you have proven that you are equals. Not through force, though you have demonstrated force. Not through deception, though you have shown that you can deceive. You have proven it through the fundamental quality that defines a peer civilization. The ability to challenge our assumptions, to force us to reconsider our certainties, to make us better than we were before.
In 11,000 years, no species has done this to the Concord. We have absorbed hundreds of civilizations, integrated thousands of perspectives,
accumulated wisdom beyond measure, but we have not been challenged. We have not been forced to grow. We have become comfortable in our supremacy, satisfied with our understanding, confident in our models.
Humanity has ended that comfortable certainty. You have shown us that the galaxy is larger, stranger, more unpredictable than we had allowed ourselves to believe. You have reminded us that every species, no matter how advanced, has more to learn.
This is not a threat. This is a gift, and we accept it with gratitude.
The assembly stirred. Many delegates seemed uncertain how to respond to this unprecedented display of humility from the High Arbiter. Others were already beginning to process the implications of what they had witnessed, the fundamental shift in galactic politics that had just occurred.
Korath was the first to speak. His voice was different now, not the fury and contempt of before, but something more complicated.
High Arbiter, I have opposed this course of action throughout our deliberations. I have argued for the elimination of humanity, for the protection of the Concord's established order. I acknowledge that I was wrong.
The assembly held its breath. Korath had never, in anyone's memory, admitted to being wrong about anything.
Captain Vasquez has demonstrated capabilities that my strategic analysts did not believe were possible. Her species has achieved developments that should have taken millennia in a matter of decades. More importantly, she has shown a quality that I did not expect: the willingness to reveal vulnerability in pursuit of genuine relationship.
The hegemony has always valued strength. We have always believed that the strong survive and the weak perish. But Vasquez has shown us a different kind of strength, the strength to take risks, to accept uncertainty, to trust in others despite the danger.
I cannot speak for the hegemony's ruling council, but I can speak for myself. I offer my respect to Captain Vasquez and the human species. You have earned a place in this galaxy. I hope you will use it wisely.
Vasquez inclined her head in acknowledgement. Thank you, Ambassador. That means more than you might think.
The Whispered's voice echoed through the assembly. We have tasted something new today. The quantum signature of this moment, of this confrontation, this revelation, this transformation, is unlike anything in our experience. We cannot predict what will come next. We can only observe that the galaxy has changed.
We offer our partnership to humanity, not in the manner of the collaborative sphere, who sought to integrate you into existing structures. We offer partnership in the manner of true equals, learning from each other, growing together, exploring the mysteries that neither of us can solve alone.
The humans have shown that they can derive fold space mathematics from pure theory. We have long studied the relationship between consciousness and reality. Perhaps together, we can discover things that neither species could discover independently.
Similar offers came from other delegations. The architects proposed joint research into spatial geometry. The chroniclers offered to share their records in exchange for access to human historical databases. Even the more cautious species seemed interested in exploring what kind of relationship might be possible with this unprecedented new addition to galactic society.
Throughout it all, Captain Vasquez remained on the display, watching, listening, occasionally responding. But her expression had changed completely. The cold determination, the calculated aggression, the careful manipulation, all of it had given way to something simpler. She looked like someone who had been carrying a tremendous weight and had finally been able to set it down. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of offers, proposals, and cautious optimism, Veloxian called for silence one last time. We have witnessed something remarkable today. A species that came to us prepared for war has instead initiated a transformation. The Galactic Concord will never be the same, and I believe, though I cannot be certain, that it will be better. Captain Vasquez, I have one final question. You said that humanity has been preparing for this moment for 87 years. You developed fold space technology, built your vessels, trained your crews, positioned your forces, all in anticipation of a confrontation that you knew was coming. What I want to know is,
What did you think would happen? When you first learned of our existence, when you began your preparations, what outcome did you hope for?
Vasquez was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft, almost vulnerable.
We hoped for exactly this. We hoped that when the moment came, we would be able to convince you that we were worth keeping around. Not because we were too dangerous to destroy, not because we could threaten you into accepting us, but because we had something to offer, something valuable, something that would make the galaxy better.
The fold space technology, the strategic positioning, the singularity bluff, all of it was designed to buy us a chance to be heard, to force you to actually listen to us, rather than just deciding our fate based on models and projections, and the comfortable assumptions of species that have never encountered anything genuinely new.
And it worked. Not the way we expected, not the way we planned, but it worked. You listened. You heard us. And instead of deciding to eliminate a threat, you decided to welcome a partner.
That's all we ever wanted. A chance to be part of something larger than ourselves. A chance to learn, to grow, to contribute. A chance to help build something that will last long after we're gone.
She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of 8 billion lives, of 87 years of preparation, of the desperate hope of a species that had stared into the void and refused to blink. We're human. We're messy, chaotic, contradictory, and often our own worst enemies. We fight among ourselves, we make terrible decisions, and we have a tendency to break things before we figure out how they work. But we also love fiercely, dream impossibly, and never, ever give up. You were debating our fate. You were going to decide in this grand assembly whether we deserved to exist. But we decided first. We decided that we wanted to exist not as subjects or threats, but as partners, as equals, as members of whatever community you're building out here among the stars. And now that you've accepted us, now that you've offered us a place at your table, we're going to do everything in our power to make you glad you did.
High Arbiter Veloxian's tendrils flared one last time, cycling through every color in the visible spectrum, and several that weren't.
Captain Elena Vasquez of Earth, speaking for the human species. The Galactic Concord recognizes your people. The Galactic Concord welcomes your partnership. The Galactic Concord looks forward to learning what impossible things you will do next.
Welcome to the stars.
The assembly erupted into sound, not chaos this time, but something else, something that might have been applause, or its equivalent across hundreds of species.
On the display, Captain Vasquez smiled. A real smile, full of wonder and relief and the beginning of hope.
The galaxy had debated humanity's fate.
But humanity had made the decision first.
And the galaxy would never be the same.
3 years later,
The Joint Human Architect Research Station hung in orbit around a star that had no name in any Concord database. It had been discovered by a human survey vessel 6 months after the Treaty of Recognition, one of thousands of new contacts enabled by humanity's integration into galactic society.
But this star was different. This star was impossible.
Dr. Maya Chen, older now, her hair fully gray, her eyes still holding that spark of intuition that had changed the course of history, stood before a holographic display that showed something no one had ever seen before.
It's a dimension fold, she said softly. A natural one. The star's gravitational field is creating a stable aperture between our reality and something else.
The architect, who had become her closest collaborator, a crystalline being who had chosen the human name Sarah for reasons that seemed to involve an appreciation for human literature, pulsed with frequencies of profound excitement.
We have theorized about such phenomena for centuries. We have searched for evidence. We have found nothing. And you discovered it within 3 years of joining the Concord.
I didn't discover it, Chen said. One of our survey captains did, a woman named Elena Vasquez. She's been spending her retirement exploring regions that the Concord never bothered to chart. Apparently, she found this about 2 weeks ago and immediately thought of my work.
Captain Vasquez. The same Captain Vasquez who...
The same one. She said she wanted to give me a present for proving that imagination is just as important as calculation.
Sarah's crystalline form sang with harmonic resonance. She has given you the discovery of a lifetime, perhaps the discovery of many lifetimes.
She's given us the discovery of many lifetimes, Chen corrected. This isn't a human thing or an architect thing. This is a Concord thing. Whatever's on the other side of that aperture, it's going to take all of us to understand it.
Through the viewport, the star pulsed with light that shouldn't exist. Light from somewhere else, somewhere impossible, somewhere new.
The galaxy had debated humanity's fate. Humanity had made the decision first. And now, together with their new partners, they were going to discover what else was waiting in the impossible darkness between the stars.